This is America and Washington, D.C., which isn't big on peace monuments. This is actually the only one explicitly called that in the whole of the capital. Here they prefer military victories. But peace, less heralded, negotiated peace, might actually be the best chance for President Trump to get out of this war quickly and on his own terms. But who are the angels of this peace who are going to deliver that for him? And what do we know about those he hopes can get the deal done? I'll have more on that later, but first, here's Cyril Vanier in our Washington studio.
John, thank you very much. When the U.S. president needs to flex his diplomatic muscle, as he does now, he doesn't call on diplomats. He calls on his longtime friend, Steve Witkoff, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. In the last 15 months, he has tasked them with ending multiple wars in Ukraine, in Gaza, and now with Iran. And there's a late addition to that team, a man who didn't support this war, Vice President JD Vance. That trio, earlier this month, spent 20 hours across the table from Iran's negotiating team and then left without visible progress. So in a moment, we'll get to our chief U.S. correspondent, Alan Fisher. He's at the White House for the very latest on the negotiation. Critics will say that Donald Trump's chosen negotiators lack the high-level diplomatic experience that is required in this moment. But the president feels that he can trust them. And not only that, they're compatible with his brand of deal-making.
JD's been great. Thank you very much. He gets a little bit tough on occasion. We've got to slow him down just a little bit on occasion. I saw something in Steve. Steve's a great negotiator. Everybody loved him. And Jared was responsible for the Abraham Accords, which is incredible. Nobody else could have done that.
Well, despite this high praise for Witkoff, Kushner, and Vance, there is no indication that an agreement between the U.S. and Iran could be around the corner. An agreement on ending the war, on Iran's nuclear program, or on the Strait of Hormuz. Al Jazeera's Manuel Rapallo takes a closer look at the team that Donald Trump is putting his trust in.
As he pursues diplomacy with Iran, President Donald Trump is turning to a small, unconventional team split across two distinct camps. On one side, a senior cabinet member with growing influence. On the other, two longtime Trump insiders, trusted by the president, but not necessarily by Tehran. Let's start with JD Vance. He's a best-selling author, a former venture capitalist turned populist politician, now one of Trump's most prominent governing partners.
What we have now that we didn't have when the president took over just a little over a year ago is the ability to use every tool at our disposal to ensure that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon.
Unlike some of Trump's other envoys, Vance has positioned himself as a skeptic of foreign intervention, a stance that resonates with parts of the Republican base. And some analysts say Iran may view Vance as a more pragmatic figure, someone potentially open to recalibrating U.S. policy rather than simply enforcing it. The second camp includes Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and former senior advisor, and real estate developer Steve Witkoff, a longtime confidant of the president. Both of these men have already been tapped to lead U.S. negotiations with Iran, though neither has delivered a breakthrough. Kushner played a key role in shaping Trump's Middle East strategy during his first term.
I don't need a history lesson, just I want a very simple thing. Here today in 2017, what's the outcome that you would accept?
He's widely seen as the architect of the Abraham Accords and remains a key voice on Middle East policy. Witkoff, meanwhile, brings negotiating experience but limited diplomatic credentials. His influence comes less from traditional statecraft and more from his personal relationship with Trump.
I have no doubt that we exhausted all efforts on behalf of a peaceful resolution, as you directed. Jared and I both agreed that the Iranians were there to buy time until a weaker president arrived.
At the same time, Vance, while politically more acceptable to Tehran, faces his own test, turning political positioning into tangible diplomatic progress. Together, this team reflects Trump's broader foreign policy approach, blending political loyalty, personal trust, and outsider instincts over conventional diplomacy. They have the ear of the president and the authority to strike a deal. What remains unclear is whether this diplomatic troika can move in sync, and whether that's enough to deliver a breakthrough with Iran. Two tracks, one objective, and a negotiation where trust may prove harder to build than the deal itself. Manuel Rapallo, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Al Jazeera's chief U.S. correspondent Alan Fisher is at the White House. So, Alan, Donald Trump decided not to send his negotiators back to Islamabad, Pakistan, at the very last minute. In spite of that, is there still communication at the moment between the U.S. and Iran?
Well, publicly, things seem to be stalled. Certainly, there's no plans that we're hearing that there's any face-to-face negotiations planned. But behind the scenes, there's always a level of communication. And certainly, we understand the Pakistanis are keen to hear from both sides and try and find a way to bridge the differences. The differences include a change and a difference in negotiating style. The Iranians believe that Donald Trump is very reactive and impulsive. They believe that it's a much more measured approach they're negotiating, not just for now, but also for ongoing years to come. And they hope that any deal they make, the United States will stick to and agree to. Now, there's another problem as well. There's red lines. Donald Trump has very clear red lines, and that makes it difficult for the Pakistanis to try and get the United States and Iran round the table, because some things that the United States say they won't accept, Iran are very keen to negotiate on. Now, Donald Trump has said all the Iranians have to do is call. The Iranians say there's a framework there for further discussions, but at the moment, as I say, those discussions seem stalled and going nowhere for now.
Al Jazeera's Alan Fisher reporting from the White House. Thank you very much, Alan. So how's the current stalemate in negotiations playing out in the U.S. media? John Holman takes a closer look.
Thanks, Cyril. Reporting on Iran has been a bit muted over the last couple of days as the US media pivoted to the attack at the White House Correspondents' Dinner here at the Washington Hilton. But on Sunday, President Trump actually phoned into Fox News, as he's wont to do, to share his thoughts on the peace process and to explain why he cancelled the trip to Islamabad of his envoys, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. Not worth an 18-hour flight, he said.
But we're going to do it by telephone. So if they want, they can call us. But again, they know what has to be in the agreement. Very simple. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. Otherwise, there's no reason to meet.
And the president said there's a deadline built in by US forces to make sure he gets what he wants, the blockade on Iran's oil. He shared a fairly visceral vision of what he thinks will happen when the country's pipelines get backed up with the black stuff.
What happens is that line explodes from within, both mechanically and in the earth. Something happens where it just explodes. And they say they only have about 3 days left before that happens.
So expect that on Wednesday. But what happens once and if Iran is brought to the table? There's been a lot of questions about his preferred negotiators. It's not working. Diplomats fear Trump's Iran envoys are making things worse, says this Time headline from 15th of April. It's talking about Kushner and Witkoff, respectively, the president's son-in-law and his friend, both of them real estate developers. They get an F in diplomacy, one former State Department negotiator told the magazine. Their faults in his eyes, inexpertise and inexperience. Add to that a trust deficit with Iran, according to Reuters, among others, after the US hit the country just after meetings with them this February. In the first round of talks, that distrust resulted in foreign war skeptic Vice President JD Vance heading to talks in Islamabad. But at the moment, neither he nor anyone else seems in danger of getting on a plane. And with that, the peace process too is idling on the tarmac.
Iran and the United States don't have formal diplomatic relations, so direct talks are extremely rare. In fact, there's only been one formal agreement between the two countries, and that's the Iran nuclear deal more than 10 years ago, also known, sometimes referred to as the JCPOA. That negotiation was headed by then Secretary of State John Kerry, a former senator who was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He had previous experience leading talks between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and he was instrumental in the ratification of a nuclear arms reduction treaty with Russia. And Kerry was backed by Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman. He wasn't alone. Wendy Sherman had worked on the 1994 agreement for North Korea to freeze its nuclear weapons program, and after that, on secret negotiations to restrict Pyongyang's missile program. So both Kerry and Sherman had prior experience in high-level state-to-state negotiations. Now compare that to Trump's team and his three key negotiators right now. Steve Witkoff, decades-old friend of the president, as we said, his experience is in real estate. But recently he has been involved in direct talks to end the war in Ukraine and Israel's war on Gaza. Alongside him, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, another real estate developer, but has also worked on the Ukraine talks, the 2020 Abraham Accords, and the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. And the very latest round of talks was led by Vice President JD Vance. That made the meeting in Pakistan, the highest level talks in nearly half a century between the U.S. and Iran. So to discuss all this, we're joined by Republican and political communications strategist John Feehery and former U.S. ambassador and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, Gordon Gray. Thank you very much to both of you for joining us. I think the most common and easiest criticism of this current negotiating team chosen by Donald Trump, right, is that Witkoff and Kushner, as we just laid out, are not former diplomats. And so I was wondering, Ambassador, as a career diplomat, is that something that bothers you? Do you think that is a real problem when you're sending people to negotiate on behalf of the U.S. government with another state?
Not necessarily. I think they've got two things going in their favor. One is the fact that they've got the trust of the president, and one is the fact that they have instant access to the president. And those two are essential factors if you're going to be a successful negotiator. Senator George Mitchell did an excellent job negotiating the Good Friday Accords. So even as a former diplomat, I have to admit, you don't have to be a diplomat to negotiate successfully. Now, that doesn't mean that that they have all the skills necessary to do so. And I think that the lack of familiarity with the nuclear file is a crucial weakness that they have. I don't mean that critically. I'm not a nuclear expert. I bet you're not a nuclear expert. John Kerry wasn't a nuclear expert either, but he was smart enough and self-aware enough to bring nuclear experts with him to the negotiations.
John Feehery?
Obviously, he knows more about this stuff than I do, but he's exactly right. If you don't know the terms that you're dealing with, you don't know the definitions, you don't know what the nuclear stuff is that you're trying to get out, and you don't have the right guys negotiating, and then it's very difficult. I think it's also very difficult to negotiate with the Iranians. I mean, they are not easy customers. They're going to walk out of the negotiations. They're going to do everything they can to delay this because they think by delay it helps them weaken the president. So I think that this team is a good team because they have the president's trust. I think they're completely unconventional. I think bringing JD Vance in, JD Vance is a very smart guy. He's probably intellectually smarter than anybody else in the administration. The question is, can he use those smarts to get a deal that is really acceptable to the American people?
But the question we're asking today really is this negotiating team suitable? So Witkoff, Kushner, Vance, and we mentioned Witkoff and Kushner don't have prior diplomatic experience. Ambassador Gray said that it's okay if they're not diplomats, but they do need the expertise. Both of you seeming to agree on the fact that, well, did they have the expertise or not to conduct these negotiations?
The number one thing they need is the president's trust, because ultimately is the president.
They have the president's trust.
Well, and so then they're acceptable. Absolutely, they're acceptable. And I think that they are.
But then the question is about, are they good negotiators, good for this job?
Well, Jared Kushner was pretty good to get the Abraham Accord, so he does have some. Witkoff has been working with Putin, trying to get a deal with the Russians, so he has some diplomatic experience there. I think the fact is we don't know how good they're going to be until they come up with an agreement, and we don't know how good the agreement's going to be. Is it worth for the American people to get involved themselves in this war? And ultimately, that's going to be a political question.
Ambassador Gray, you could make the kind of the counter argument of the usual criticism of Witkoff and Kushner, the counter argument being that in the last year and a half, certainly in Witkoff's case, he has accrued more face time with world leaders in high-level talks than maybe anyone else on the planet at this point. He's been meeting face-to-face with President Putin, with Ukrainian President Zelensky, with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, with Israeli intelligence. The list goes on. He's been meeting in Qatar. He's been involved in so many high-level talks that at this point, maybe he has accrued the experience that you need for this.
I think the issue is not whether they have the experience or not. It's whether they have the expertise and whether they can deliver a deal. Yes, he's met with Putin several times. He's met with Putin without his own translator there, which is a grave mistake. And let's face it, he's fallen hook, line, and sinker for a lot of the Russian propaganda, a lot of Putin's talking points on Ukraine. I think he went into that negotiation thinking it was a real estate deal. It's not a real estate deal. It's an existential question for Ukraine and for President Zelensky, and it's also a much larger issue for President Putin than just who controls Donetsk or a few kilometers on the Russian-Ukrainian front.
And this war with Iran is also an existential question for them. I want to add a few things for our viewers' benefit to the wins and losses for both Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Despite having little prior experience of official government diplomacy, as we've discussed, Witkoff and Kushner have by now built up quite a few hours of face-to-face time with world leaders, and they do have some wins to their name. So arguably, the biggest for Kushner, and it's just been mentioned, was brokering the 2020 Abraham Accords. That saw the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain normalize diplomatic and commercial relations with Israel. The president's son-in-law also worked alongside Witkoff to lead negotiations for a ceasefire deal in Gaza, a deal that Israel has violated on a near-daily basis, killing hundreds of Palestinians since that deal was signed. Kushner and Witkoff are both executive members of the Board of Peace, the body which was created to oversee Gaza's redevelopment, but it has itself come in for criticism. They were also the ones leading indirect negotiations in Oman and Geneva before the U.S. went on to bomb Iran both times. In addition to all those talks, the pair have held direct but as yet unsuccessful negotiations with both the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, Ambassador Gray was just mentioning that, and with the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky. So at this point, Witkoff and Kushner, when they met with the Iranians, and JD Vance as well, it was well reported, and they said so publicly, that they were on the phone with Donald Trump some more than a dozen times. Do they have, who's negotiating here? Is it Donald Trump, or do they have some sort of wiggle room to put their imprint on this negotiation?
I personally think it's all about the president. And I think that the reason he has Witkoff and Kushner there is because they bring a business sensibility. And I think he's trying to develop a commercial relationship. And I think he's trying to do it in a way, I think this whole Board of Peace is an effort to try to get more business into Gaza and kind of bring kind of a business diplomacy. And I think that this is the president who's wrote a book called The Art of the Deal.
Before you get business into Gaza, Gaza would need to exist, which currently it's barely does.
Question. No, there's no question about that. But that's the vision that Trump had. How can I make money on this? How can we have how can we have business in Gaza? That's the first thing he thinks about. And so I think from the perspective of having these two as his principal negotiators, that's where they're coming at this. They're coming at it from a business perspective, not necessarily from a diplomatic perspective. And I think that's why the president is directly involved in these talks.
So it's interesting you bring this up. In that case, let's hear how Steve Witkoff himself describes his negotiating strategy. This is how he talked about his approach to negotiations. Here he is speaking on the Tucker Carlson show.
I sit with the president and we talk often about what the end game is. Where does he want to get to? And once you decide where you want to get to, then it's all about tactically figuring out what that pathway is. Though there's no doubt I'm always trying to put myself in the shoes of the other person, because a good deal has to work for everybody.
Okay, so you heard Witkoff, Ambassador Gray, saying, I try to put myself in the other party's shoes, see what they want, and whether I can get that for them. Do you think that works in the context of this Iran negotiation?
I think it works in any negotiation. If you don't understand where your opposite number in the negotiation is coming from, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. It's going to make it that much more difficult. What troubled me in that clip that we just saw is Mr. Witkoff saying he sits with the president and gets his strategic guidance. It would be wonderful for the American people if the president shared what his strategic objectives were, because they continually shift over time, and they shift depending on which voice in the administration is speaking.
Are Witkoff and Kushner the right people to put across the table from Iran, given that each time Iran has negotiated with them, they've been bombed? Doesn't that argue in favor of maybe change the team?
I don't think it necessarily argues in favor of changing it, but I think it was probably a smart move to add Vice President Vance to it, who, by all the reports I saw, was specifically requested by the Iranian side.
Or you could make the counter argument that that is the very reason why Donald Trump actually keeps them in the team, because their mere presence brings the very credible threat of further military action.
Listen, Witkoff and Kushner are extraordinarily close to Israel. And I think that that's one of the reasons why they're there. And clearly the vice president is someone who is very apprehensive about going into this war in the first place, which is why the Iranians want him in the negotiation. But he's also very highly ranking. So, I mean, from a diplomatic standpoint, but also from a prestige standpoint, getting the vice president to do the face-to-face talks. And I would make one other point. People talk about the unconventional approach, but this is the first time we've had face-to-face negotiations in a half a century. Good on Trump for doing that. I mean, this is...
Well, no, the JCPOA.
Well, those were not face-to-face. I mean...
They negotiated for a month and a half. Well, excuse me, for a year and a half with the full thrust of the U.S. government.
But the vice president was not meeting with them personally. So this is the big deal of what they've done here. And I think that this covers the whole range here with both the vice president and with these two, Witkoff and Kushner, who are very close to Israel.
So since you mentioned JD Vance, let's listen to what Donald Trump had to say, half jokingly, I have to admit. You may have heard this before. Let's listen to what the president said about JD Vance and sending him to the talks in Islamabad, Pakistan.
So if it doesn't happen, I'm blaming JD Vance. If it does happen, I'm taking full credit.
Okay, I was just wondering your reading of that moment. It's half in jest, half a joke, but half not a joke.
It's true.
Okay.
I mean, Trump's going to take credit if it's a success, and if it fails, he's going to blame somebody else, because that's how he operates. Am I right about that? I think.
Ambassador?
Agree completely.
Yeah. Why send JD Vance then, in your view, to the negotiation, given that he already had a tandem, a duo that he was happy with?
I think there are a few reasons. One reason is, as I just said, the Iranians apparently signaled that they wanted him at the table. And as you pointed out, their last two rounds of negotiations with Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner ended up in them being bombed. So I think that's the first reason. I think the second reason, and John's probably better placed to address this than I am, but I think the second reason is, let's face it, President Trump is prosecuting an unpopular war. It's particularly divisive for his base, who thought they were electing a president who had promised no new wars, and that's not what they delivered. By sending the most prominent member of the administration, identified with the anti-interventionist wing, I think he helps shore up his base.
What does this do for JD Vance in the perspective of the next presidential run, 2028? He's one of the names, obviously, one of the people as the vice president, possibly the most obvious candidate to represent the Republicans.
Well, first of all, it gives him great experience. The ability to be in part of really high-level negotiations, to sit there 20 hours with an implacable enemy. For him, this is good for the resume. But also, I think
it's only good if he actually delivers a deal.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I think that ultimately the experiences last a lifetime, and I also think that as someone who's well known as being kind of against this war, if he can get us out of this war, that'll make the MAGA folks who do not like this war. I mean, the MAGA movement's pretty split, but most people are very uncomfortable with what we've done here. And if the president really did kind of campaign on the idea he'd keep us out of unpopular wars. So if Vance can get us out of this war, that will really kind of make him a hero to the MAGA movement.
Ambassador, you think this is a win for JD Vance, ultimately?
I think it's a win if he brings home a settlement, and I think it's a loss for his presidential aspirations if it goes belly up.
I want to thank our guests today for joining us. Republican and political communications strategist John Feehery and former U.S. Ambassador and Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, Gordon Gray. Thank you very much to both of you for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff in particular have been under the social media microscope for their roles in this negotiation, as we've discussed, and many in the public arena asking whether they are the right men for the job. Alex Beard has more.
Democratic Senator Chris Murphy lit the fuse online with this. His damning review of Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. Two negotiators, no diplomatic experience, and in way over their heads. The clapback, just as fast. Supporters trying to correct Murphy, reminding him that Kushner was key in negotiating the Abraham Accords in 2020, that series of Israeli normalization agreements with the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. But conservative journalist Peter Laffin is flipping that script, saying the experience can only mean empty credentials awarded to mediocrities of no achievement. More of those Lego AI videos doing the rounds, claiming Kushner's marriage to the president's daughter is the only thing that got him here. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald saying, why would Iran want to deal with Kushner, who they see as a supporter of Israel, or with Witkoff, who they see as unsuitable? This 60 Minutes interview with Kushner last year doing the rounds once again.
What people call conflicts of interest, Steve and I call experience and trusted relationships.
Adam Cochran's breakdown saying this is all pretty simple and that the choice of negotiators sends a clear message to Tehran. No chance of a deal, send Witkoff and Kushner. Low chance with possible humiliation, send Vice President JD Vance. High chance of a good outcome, but still some talking needed, send Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And a done deal, send President Donald Trump.
And that is all from the team here out of our Washington studio. Today we've been looking at the people who make up Donald Trump's trusted team of negotiators and what they're expected to achieve in diplomatic talks with Iran. On This Is America, we'll keep following the decisions that shape the United States and influence the rest of the world. If you want to catch up on this episode or previous ones, head to our website, aljazeera.com, or check out our YouTube channel. John Holman looks ahead to our next show.
On the next edition of This Is America, at this time of neither peace nor war, we'll be focusing what this stalemate will cost the US and Iran until they reach a deal. That's Tuesday at 18:30 GMT or 14:30 Eastern. Bye for now.